Hello and welcome to Pop Screen, part of Geek Show Podcast Network. We are that corner of the Geek Show that likes to look at the good, the bad, and the bewildering of movies, either starring by or about pop stars. No, the podcast covers a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip-hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a writer for the Geek Show and Byline Times, as well as a filmmaker and video artist. And this is the first of our special month of collaborations where we have 3 hosts instead of the usual 2. And for that, I have been joined by Aidan.
I don't want to go down to the basement. There's something down there. Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
And in the basement, Rob.
I've been Vincent, haven't I? That's what's happened here.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, someone has outdone you before you have a chance to introduce. Yeah,
that's the thing. Vincent Gain, who appears on both of our podcasts, and he has a habit of you saying his name penultimately, and he does this amazing "Hello, I am" sort of segment. And the person who comes after is like, "Okay, what am I supposed to do then?"
All right, yeah. Hi.
To be fair, even I couldn't do that. I mean, even I can't outclass Vincent.
Yeah, he is very, very good at that. Yeah. Hello, by the way. Yes.
Hello. Yes. Just before we get started, just give a quick introduction to yourself, Aidan.
Yeah, no, I'm Aidan Fatkin, also known as Aidan F on Letterboxd. You can find me there under that username, but you can also find me at Doco and Drummer. But like I say, write film reviews. That's pretty much it. Kind of undersell myself, but hey ho, whatever.
Hey ho, let's go.
Yeah,
Rob?
exactly.
I'm perennially burned out podcaster who does the sister program to this very show, Uncut. We just did a here's a hint, podcast fans: don't record a podcast when you've got gastroenteritis. It doesn't go well.
Wow.
That happened
Okay.
on the recent Kiyoshi Kurosawa podcast. Had some great co-hosts. So yeah, I am the host of the sister podcast of this episode, or the series, I should say.
Indeed. And it has to be a pretty special movie, or at least a pretty special musical act to get us all together. And well, let's say it's Rock and Roll High School, starring the Ramones. Had anyone watched this film before?
I'll be frank, no. I never saw it before.
Vague recollections of it.
Mm.
It's the sort of movie you watch when you're a teenager, isn't it, ideally? And I did have recollections of seeing it back then.
Yeah, I mean, I'd always been aware of Rock and Roll High School. I hadn't seen it before, largely because I was more Ramones fan than actually seeing the film that they starred in. So, but it's always like that. Sometimes you always get into the artist first before you see, like, if they have been in films, you know, or at least it's a band. Yeah.
I can well imagine that you would watch this when you were a teenager and not remember it, because I watched it like 3 days ago and already parts of it seem like some weird fever dream.
Yeah,
Well, I was a teenager fueled by Hong Kong action movies and Tartan Asian extremes, so this is like a nice homely movie as far as my teenage years of discovery go. This is like what listening to Radio 1 of my teenage years.
It can't be that much like Radio 1, because my association with listening to Radio 1 now is it just makes you feel 1,000 years old, like you should just crumble into dust immediately, like you should run for the president of the USA. You are that old.
See, the key is you don't. Here's my first Rob bit of ranting. A lot of people like that, you know, because they don't listen to new music. You know.
Yeah.
I know you do, Graham. but a lot of people they stop listening to music when they're 16. So if they don't still continue to play that music that you listen to when you're 16, you are ancient.
Yeah.
That
No.
will crop up as a running theme with me saying stuff today. I'm preemptively sorry.
Well, it's useful because we're about to talk about one of the great, this is year zero moments of pop history, the moment where you were either on side with a new form of music or you were past it, which is punk rock.
Yes. They are one of the forebearers of American punk rock. But yeah, there's more before this, and I'm not going to become the punk rock historian and bore everybody. But yeah, I'll just sort of step back a little bit.
The rock family trees guy, yeah.
The Mount Rushmore of punk rock. Sorry,
someone should make that. Yeah,
that's an impossible thing to ask. That's impossible.
Yeah, I mean, even I can't claim that. Yeah.
But just to impress upon listeners how close the Ramones are to the origin of punk rock, the journalist Legs McNeil saw their first ever gig in 1974. About a year later, he would found the magazine Punk, which is where punk rock got its name from. So they predate their own genre, essentially.
Yeah, it's a funny style, isn't it? It had a style before it had a name. It's not like now where every other journalist is their sort of claim to immortality is to, I don't know, make up porno grind or something. That is a real genre, by the way, porno grind. I'm not just pulling it out of nowhere.
And yet I'm having to take that on trust because I don't know.
Yeah. It's just that's how journalists make their name now. Once upon a time, it was just rock music.
Yeah.
That's it. Simple as that.
And speaking of rock and punk music, because like I say with the Ramones, everyone says like they were the forebearers of punk, but I like to think of like those genres of music have like an evolutionary stance, so they've originated like beforehand, and before then you really had like bands acts, and I've probably banged on about this before. You had acts like the Stooges or the New York Dolls, who kind of had similar flavors to that. What?
Yeah, I'm preempting an episode that I assume I'll do with Graham at some point. Death.
We have been talking about doing a band called Death for far too long. Yes.
A band called this is news to me, actually. I've never heard of this band.
Well, there you go. That's because we haven't made an episode on it yet.
Exciting.
Yeah. The song Politician in My Eyes become one of my favourite off that movie.
Interesting.
About Vietnam. Yeah.
But the Ramones.
Yeah, this is like sort of an era now where the Stooges, Def and all that are called proto-punk, whereas real punk, sort of like the pop sensibilities, but with very fast guitars. And the whole sort of scene that came out of New York and the I can never say it, CGBG club.
Yeah.
Bands like the Ramones, Blondie, Television, New York Dolls, stuff like that.
Talking Heads as well, yeah.
Well, they're more, I don't know whether to call them punk per se, because that's the whole thing, isn't it? Like, like the whole movement of post-punk. What does that mean? It's like, it's one of these, there's thousands of genres and it's just really confusing. But as far as that original movement in New York, Ramones were right at the cusp. They were bleeding edge.
And they're sort of, as well as being sort of iconically punk, they're also an iconically New York band. I think there is definitely, you can imagine telling someone that Blondie started off as New York punks and they'd be like, what, seriously? Because for some people, Blondie means Heart of Glass and Atomic. But if you said it about the Ramones, you're like, well, duh, where else are they going to come from?
But like I said, you couldn't say the same thing about Television or Talking Heads. I would like to think because they're never, it was never really like that for them, really. Yeah.
No.
And it was when New York was basically the cesspit of the earth. It was a right old pit.
I mean, in my opinion, it still is, but largely because it's full of edgy hipster podcasters, which is a very different reason.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Back
it's worse
then-
now, honestly.
Oh, yeah. Back then, you'd walk out of your door and you'd get stabbed, whereas now there are people who walk out of their dorm and they should get stabbed, and they're not. And it's a national tragedy. They should step that up.
No comment on that, Graham. No comment.
But yes. So the Ramones were hugely important, iconic, had a very long afterlife, still mean something today. In their time, not that big, which is why I think when Roger Corman, for it is he again, was putting Rock and Roll High School into production, his first thought was that maybe Cheap Trick or Todd Rundgren should be the musical artists featured.
I did
And-
read this. Yeah, I noticed that. Imagine a rock and roll high school with like Todd Rundgren or fucking Cheap Trick. I just don't think it would be the same.
I think Cheap Trick. What was that movie called? I associate them more with that.
Is that a Cheap Trick movie? I didn't.
It's not a
I
Cheap
wasn't-
Trick movie. It's like a song which is very pivotal to a movie in Cheap Trick. It's about sort of moving to the suburb, moving from the inner cities out into the suburbs, and there's a lot of kids who don't really know what to do. I think Matthew Dillon is very young in it.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh shit!
Over
Kurt
the
Cobain
Edge,
was
is
a
it
big
called?
fan. Yes, yeah,
That's the movie I associate with Cheap Trick.
yeah.
Great
I mean,
movie. Yeah.
I don't mind Cheap Trick, but you have to wonder, like, what the rest of the movie would be like after they'd played My Sharona. Like, do they just stand around and go?
Anyone got any ideas for another one?
Because the thing about punk, the sort of stereotype, there's an ice cream van. Shut up, ice cream van, I'm talking. Is the sort of 3-minute pop structure, isn't it? The 3-minute pop song, that's what punk is sort of synonymous with. But it wasn't always that way, because Ramones, their songs, 3 minutes, Don't Be Soft, 90 seconds,
3
and
minutes
you like
is
it.
the 3 minutes is the 12-inch disco version of some of these.
Yeah.
It's like a full EP you can get for 3 minutes and be done with it. But yeah, 90
Younger
seconds and done.
listeners, yeah, they were, for younger listeners, they were very much the Pink Pantheress of their era. I'm just clawing a bit of it back after I said that thing about Radio 1. I'm still with it. It's fine.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah,
the irony now is they're just t-shirts. That's what a lot of people know Ramones for. Just
Yeah.
t-shirts out of Primark. They're one of those bands like Led Zeppelin as well, where people know them for the logos on t-shirts.
The strangest one is the Misfits, where, I mean, no disrespect to the Misfits, but I cannot imagine that even a tenth of people wearing Misfits t-shirts have listened to Misfits albums, because they're still not a huge band. They're still a cult band.
Yeah, my favourite explanation of the Misfits was Spooky Elvis. Cramps as well as Spooky Elvis.
Cramps is very
Yeah.
Spooky Elvis. Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ramones are hugely influential.
And they ended up in this film rather than Todd Rundgren or Cheap Trick because of the intervention of one person. And I think Rob will be delighted to find out who that one person was.
Oh.
Yeah.
Because it was Paul Bartel. Paul Bartel.
Oh, Paul Bartel, that's lovely.
He was the guy who went to Roger Corman and said, you know, there's a band who were much better and who were going to cost much less money.
Yeah. Paul Bartel, he's the director of Eating Raoul, and he's in it with I can never remember her name. She's also in this as the
Mary
principal.
Warrenoff.
Mary Warrenoff, yeah.
And they're also together in a shopping mall in a scene at the beginning. So I like to think this is the movie where they met. And that's sort of like a little narrative between these three movies.
Yeah, I think it genuinely might be, you know. I mean, Mary Warrenoff has an amazing career. She was one of the Warhol superstars. But unlike most of the rest of them, she could actually act rather than just look cool in front of a camera. And she went on to an extraordinary and varied career. Aside from this, her biggest claim to punk rock legend is that she played the lead singer's mother in the video to Institutionalized by Suicidal Tendencies.
Oh wow, okay.
Well, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean,
Cool, I think.
yeah, I agree. Yeah, but no, I second that. Yeah, I second that because I do love Paul Bartel and Mary Warrenoff. Because if you've not seen Eating Raoul at all, it's one of the funniest films I think I've ever seen in my life.
It's nice because when you say Paul Bartel, you think he's sort of he's just an overweight guy, bald. He looks like a maths teacher. He's every maths teacher you've ever had.
And he's a music teacher in this, so perilously close, really.
Yeah. And he's a real champion for the Ramones. It's just sort of really bizarre.
Yeah.
It's like finding out your teacher's actually cool outside of school. It's like,
Yeah.
what's going on here?
That's really sweet too, I think. Yeah, completely agree.
We're using some very aptly school-centric metaphors for this because I use the term plot in its loosest possible sense, but the plot of Rock and Roll High School involves a school with an extreme juvenile delinquency problem whose students successfully campaign for the Ramones to play at their school, despite their principal's wishes. Principal's played by Warrenoff. She has an army of people who are kind of, I guess they're hall monitors. They land something between Boy Scouts and the Hitler Youth, and they're all like sexually fixated on her. And it's all very odd, which is the first hint, I guess, that this is co-written by Joe Dante.
Yeah. He's not got the best grasp of children, really, has he, or teenagers?
I don't know, man. I think Joe Dante films always work when you're young because you realise that this is a film made by a grown-up who isn't trying to, kid it up, isn't trying to make everything kiddie-friendly. And this is definitely a good example of that.
Yeah, it's an odd position it's in, really, because it's, what was it, late 70s anyway?
79, yeah.
We're in the era of things like Porky's and Last American Virgin, all these movies, and they were all sort of quite crude, overly sexualized. Can't really watch them now because it's like, wow, the 80s were different, weren't they? But this, it's quite chaste.
It's interesting, this. Yeah.
It's very chaste, in fact.
I've watched a few like teen movies from various eras over the past few years. Some of them for podcasts, like when we did that uncut episode on 90s teen movies, and some of them because I had a blow to the head last year and started watching 60s beach party movies as a result.
I remember that.
Great days. One of the things that I think makes them so odd is that for a lot of them they can only consist of boys dating girls as like
the only form of social interaction they can conceive of.
It's like even friendships don't quite exist in these movies. It's all hookups. And this feels like a very conscious parody of that. You have that very odd character Eagle Bauer played by Clint Howard, whose only job seems to be setting sexually frustrated students up with each other.
Yeah.
He makes absolutely no sense as someone who should be on school property, but he makes perfect sense as the kind of guy who you imagine is working behind the scenes of something like Last American Virgin.
He's a weird actor as well because he's clearly young here, but even when he was young, he was like the youngest 35-year-old man I've ever seen. And he's like that in everything in this era, really. It's a bizarre role, but it's also an archetype at the same time. There was a lot of that sort of knowing, sort of a wheeler-dealer student in these movies.
That's true.
Yeah. And especially how it's set up in this, because he's presented as if, like, I want to say, like, there's an element of a game show host to him as well, which is like the archetypal kind of stereotype you pivot towards these characters. But then again, it just reminds you of like how like freewheeling it is at the same time, how these characters can be presented, how it like crystallizes the satire.
Because there's a running gag in it that the principal, the Mary Warrenoff character, is convinced
That rock and roll has
like devastating psychological and physical effects on mice, and she's doing experiments to prove this.
Yeah.
And this culminates in one of the weirdest jokes I've seen in my life, where the giant mouse turns up to the final concert. And I mean, this is not one of the Chronicles of Narnia movies, listeners. There's no reason for giant mice who can talk to be part of the film's reality. It just happens.
Yeah, it reminds me of a lot of those. I can't remember what they call them. Screaming Mad Steve or something. He did
Screaming Mad George.
No, maybe I'm confusing the two people. But there's a great John Cusack movie from the 80s when he was like a kid called Better Off Dead. It was one of these sort of madcap 80s comedies. As you're just like, oh, that's where all of these random jokes that make no sense come from.
Yeah.
That sort of mice thing feels like it's very much of that stock. I would recommend Better Off Dead, by the way. It's a very funny movie.
That's a Rob Reiner one, right?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Oh no, Rob Reiner did the Shoer thing with Cusack around the same time. So yeah, that's what I'm getting mixed up with.
Yeah, I don't know the name of the movie, but the one where he holds the record above his head and plays it to his
say anything.
Yeah, around that sort of era.
Yeah.
I'm thinking. But yeah, it's that sort of these movies are probably inspired by Airplane. Just as let's just have loads of gags. Does that make sense? No.
It is very Airplane. It is very that. What's it? Abrahams and Zucker stock.
Zucker Abrahams Zucker.
Zucker Abrahams Zucker. Yeah.
Now, this actually precedes Airplane by 1 year, although I think the Zucker Abrahams Zucker team had been active before that. I think in the credits, there is one of the Zucker brothers as like an additional director, and I really should have checked whether it's the same guy or whether it's not that common a surname, but let's have a look. Jerry Zucker is credited as the second unit director, and yes, according to IMDb, it's that Jerry Zucker.
I fluked upon a weird connection there. I didn't know that.
Hey, I fluked upon another one because I wrongly mentioned Screaming Mad George, who was, of course, the effects artist who did Society. And I also discovered from the credits that the giant mouse costume was made by a young Rob Bottin.
Really?
Oh, wow. Okay.
He must have been really young because he was known for being kind of a up-and-coming scrappy kid when he was doing his iconic work. He just had that chance as a kid. So,
another weird connection that I've just found out, Dean Cundy, who did the cinematography for this, also shot Halloween, The Fog, and The Thing.
Well, there you go. There's a lot of Carpenter connections here, really. I mean, we haven't even mentioned the big one, that the lead is PJ Souls, who was in Halloween and who was in Carrie a bit before that as well.
I think it being like a big connection, I think it's more like a sign of the different times of Hollywood. If you look at the credits then, and the credits were like 2 minutes done, like 8 people made this movie. That's rather refreshing.
But it also gives you a sense of community as well, I like to think. There's just this community.
Like a smaller community of people involved in the filmmaking. I mean, whereas now you look at the credits and it's about 2 days long. And
I think also if you're
working for somewhere like Roger Corman's New World Productions, you sort of have to be able to turn your hands to every genre because they made anything that was in fashion. So it is plausible that someone could go from making back-to-back horror classics and then turn up in a teen comedy. I mean, that's the whole reason why this is the third film we've done an episode about this summer to have Dick Miller in the cast.
Yeah, he's in it very briefly.
Very.
But that was the common model, wasn't it? He didn't direct an awful lot, but he just knew what was the button at the time, the hot topic that would get a lot of bums on seats.
Totally.
give him a career which lasted a ridiculously long amount of time for somebody who's so out of the system, so as it were.
There was a lovely comment I saw online after his recent death, which pointed out that at the age of 98, Roger Corman had even managed to get his money's worth out of life.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh.
He knew the market, and he knew that there was interest in these sort of rock movies, because that late 70s, that was the real coming out party for this sort of music.
Yeah,
around this era. Yeah,
it's interesting because the anecdote about it nearly being Cheap Trick and nearly being Todd Rundgren does like let you know that the rock band in this movie are kind of an interchangeable piece. There's nothing specifically Ramonesy about the role they play in the story. What I think does make it work and makes it worthwhile for Ramones fans is the fact that their presence here just clicks with the sort of energy and the anarchy of the humor in it in a way that another band's just wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, it's the punk of the era. I mean, these exemplify the sort of the anarchy of punk more than all of the peers at the CGB place did. I mean, you know, Blondie were art school kids, basically. Television were art school kids.
Talking Heads were super art school kids.
They were, yeah.
New York Dolls were basically homeless people, to be honest. They went too far the other way.
Yes.
And the sort of the nice... I mean that in the nicest sense, because New York at the time was genuinely a hovel. It was like all these bands lived in like one room, usually. So yeah, that's the sort of thing I'm talking about there. I'm not homeless shaming, absolutely not. But yeah, as far as the breadline of New York rock, like this, New York Dolls are really, you know, scrappy. Whereas I think Ramones are sort of the best of every sort of trait of that era. Very artsy, but also quite scrappy and a bit of everyman to them.
I think the artsiness of the Ramones comes through in a different way. It doesn't come through in like big concepts or genre mixing like it did with Talking Heads. It comes through in the sort of image focus, the discipline to say this is what we wear. This is our logo. This is our surname, of course. You know, that idea that everything has to be ruthlessly within a certain image.
Yeah, basically screaming out, "This is our identity." Yeah.
They were quite shrewd, you know, because that's like brand identity, and they did it in a way where it didn't make you absolutely despise everything about them, unlike a certain Kiss, because Kiss are awful, and they do actually get dropped in there. And the PJ Souls character, I think she's cool. I'd probably be here if this was sort of real life, because that's what I was like when I was that age. And then I saw a book and it had Kiss on it. No, nothing to do with that.
That's definitely a relic of the Cheap Trick draft, isn't it? I can imagine someone being into Cheap Trick and Kiss, but I'd struggle to imagine someone being into Kiss and the Ramones.
No, it's just it's like being into Creed and, well, a good band. And yes, it's still okay to bash Creed, even though there was that documentary, I think it was on Netflix, that said they're the most hated band in America, despite being one of the most successful ones.
I mean, one of those reputations is justifiable. Yeah.
Worst band in America.
So yeah, this is, I mean, we've been talking about Corman a lot. He did not direct this. It was Allan Arkush, who sort of went on to do a lot of music-themed movies, which I guess is kind of inevitable. One of the ones that wasn't, 1995's Young at Heart, nevertheless features Frank Sinatra's last acting performance. And I love that we can draw a direct line from Frank Sinatra to the Ramones now. That's possible.
Yeah, didn't he wasn't Sinatra famous for calling the Beatles long-haired hippies?
Yes.
So what he would have thought of the Ramones? Oh wow!
Well, we came up with our much better nickname for the Ramones when we were discussing this podcast, which is that they are a band of Adam Drivers.
Yeah, I mean, Joey Ramone is Adam Driver. It's
Especially Joey Ramone, yeah.
Yeah. I
he's
feel
not the
like
coolest. It's Dee Dee. Dee Dee's the coolest, but yeah, Joey
Yeah.
Ramone is Adam Driver.
Joey is absolutely Adam Driver, to the extent where I feel like we have found Adam Driver's Oscar-winning music biopic role here.
Yeah, they'll be like, "Why have you turned up in costume, Adam? We're supposed to put you in it when you get here." It's like, no, this is just what I look like.
This is like my whole style.
Oh, now I just want to hear a punk rock version of bloody that song from Inside Llewyn Davis. No.
Please, Mr. Kennedy. Yeah.
I just want to hear that now.
If you get like Jim Jarmusch to do it, and I think you're onto a winner there.
I
The
think you
Jarmusch and
are.
Driver
Yeah.
connection and Ramones. Didn't he do a Ramone? He did a. No, it was a Stooges documentary, wasn't it?
Yeah, he did a Stooges documentary. Yeah, Game
It's not-
Danger.
A million miles out of the sort of realm of possibility, I don't think.
Totally. Yeah, yeah.
If you like the Stooges, you probably like the Ramones too.
Yes. I just want to talk a bit more about like the Ramones as a career, because one of
The things about having this kind of very disciplined sense of who your band are and what they look like and what they act like and everything
is that well sort of runs dry after a while, and I think most people would agree the early Ramones stuff is the vintage stuff, but I got into them when you know how I often tell anecdotes about how my granddad was the coolest fucking person in the world?
Mm.
Well, he got me into the Ramones
Oh,
because he bought one of their later albums, 1993's Acid Eaters, which was a collection of like 60s like garage rock and pop covers, because it had a version of Out of Time by the Rolling Stones on it, and he loved that song. And he had no idea who the Ramones were at that point. He took it home and went, fair enough, this is actually really great. So that's how I got into the Ramones. Does anyone else have getting into the Ramones memories?
I think I just like discovered them one day by myself. So it was just a amount of like putting on their debut album, because everyone, if it's one of the go-to albums you want to get into the Ramones, I always go for the debut. And just like being completely like blown away for it being like half an hour long, but just like song after song after song, and then just being completely just falling in love head over heels with it. Yeah. So I mean that's my Ramones story, but I think that's like that for a lot of people, to be fair.
You'd be surprised. Being
suppose
of the
for a lot
same
of
generation
people
of Graham, to quote South Park, The Simpsons did it.
Yeah, no.
Which it was a weird time for The Simpsons. I mean, I was thinking that you should totally do The Simpsons on this podcast, because the number of bands that have been on that is astonishing.
Such a good point.
But
Yes.
for mine and Graham's generation, sort of came of age in sort of the 90s and growing up in the 90s, there were so many bands that the Simpsons introduced us to. So many. And the Ramones were just one of the who's who, frankly. Sonic Youth, you'd think, I heard about them in some cool, place. Not Simpsons did it.
Yeah.
So many. It's ridiculous.
The Ramones had like the privilege of not only being on The Simpsons, but being on one of the all-time great Simpsons episodes, and being one of the funniest bits of that episode, where they're playing Mr. Burns' birthday party, and he responds to their punk version of Happy Birthday to You by leaning over to Smithers and going, "Have the Rolling Stones killed?"
Yeah. But it's astonishing how many bands sort of broke through in that way because of having that little cameo in The Simpsons. It was sort of it was more important at that time than sort of like a gold record or anything like that. It was just that sort of cultural cut through, because everybody watched that show at its peak. Everybody did. So it just sort of took your band to a new level. Yeah.
it had that status for like our generation of something like Morecambe and Wise back in the 70s, where for some reason every single famous person just wanted to turn up and be insulted on this show.
Yeah.
It's like now the weirdest thing in the world. I can never remember. Is it Run DMC? It's not Run DMC, is it? It's
Oh, I know what you mean. Yeah, where it was just hit the news lately.
yeah, and the
with
guy
the yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Did you order the London Philharmonic? And this is did we?
Cypress Hill.
Cypress Hill.
Yes,
there
yeah.
we go. It's like Simpsons just manifests stuff. Cool stuff, not just all horrible sort of reality altering stuff like Donald Trump as president. Cool stuff too.
Yeah,
Cypress Hill and the London Philharmonic. Yeah.
Oh man, when we do that Simpsons episode, and now you've put it into my head, I know that we have to.
But when we do it, we have to talk for ages about Homerpalooza because it's just an incredible episode.
It's so good it briefly makes Billy Corgan appear to have a sense of humour about himself.
Well, yeah, we know that's not true. It's just not. But yeah, it's very pivotal for a lot of people, me included.
Yeah.
Mm.
No, absolutely. There's a lot of non-Ramones music on the soundtrack as well. I mean, the Ramones stuff is what it's remembered for, but they did get A Dream Goes On Forever by Todd Rundgren, even if they couldn't get Todd Rundgren. I was delighted to hear PJ Souls' character listening to Rock and Roll by the Velvet Underground. Big smile on my face there.
It ends at the climax with it's got to be in there somewhere. School's Out by Alice Cooper as well.
Of course,
it
yes.
has to end. Yeah.
The thing that boggles about him is you'd think he'd be like this real rebel rouser, wouldn't you? But no, he's a super conservative man.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. But he's like this icon of teen rebellion, and he's basically like a Tory donor in sort of American terms. It's bizarre image for me, honestly.
Very keen golfer, which I think is exactly what you expect a rebellious proto-metal star to be.
Because he replaced his alcoholism with a golfing obsession, and he replaced that with the addiction. And to me, yeah.
I'm not sure it's an improvement, if I'm honest.
It is a cliche of a song, but it was also in class of 1982. It was a big sort of feature of that too.
Was it?
Was it 1990? There was two movies that were done. 84, 82, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think they went. Yeah. It was 84. But I think they were going for the George Orwell reference, weren't they? Which is why the next one goes into weird science fiction.
Yeah, it was a big feature of that movie, but I think it fits better here.
It's one of those
in the spirit of the movie. Yeah,
it is one of those songs, as Aidan says, where on one level it has to be in there, and you roll your eyes when it starts playing because it's so obvious, and then you stop rolling your eyes because it fucking kicks ass, and it is the perfect song for that scene.
Yeah, it's like cliches work because they're good. It's just the lazy ones that do kind of burn the bridge a bit. But when
absolutely.
Good, it's great. Yeah.
They also managed to get "Did We Meet Somewhere Before" by Paul McCartney, which I can't
imagine was cheap. It's like
how did Roger Corman afford a song by a former Beatle?
It doesn't really fit either.
No,
it's kind of like someone's dad's music has got in with all of this sort of cool young punk rock.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is an odd choice. It does allow me to give you the
first of one of two
links with the Ramones and other classic artists, because there is a Ramones Paul McCartney link other than this. Do we know what it is?
No.
Their name and their shared surname came from a bit of Beatles trivia that Paul McCartney used to check into hotels under the false name Paul Ramon.
Oh, really? I was wondering that way. Because Ramon isn't a name that I've heard of, so I was where's the origins of that?
Yeah.
The other one, I'm pleased to say, is tons funnier. That's like a piece of nerdy rock trivia that you can use to bore your friends with, but this is actually quite amusing. That at one point, the Ramones were about to play a club in, I think it was on like one of their first British gigs, and they met a guy in the bar who said that they asked if he was in a band, and he said, "Yeah, we're in a band, but we just rehearse. We're not any good." At which point the Ramones told him that, you should hear us. We're really terrible musicians, but we still sound fucking great. And that guy was inspired to start playing gigs with his band.
He was Paul Simonon, and the band was The Clash.
Yeah, I'm not allowed to say what I think of The Clash. So yeah, I'll just sidestep that one.
Aidan's looking vengeful. If it helps, Rob, Paul Simonon was also playing on some of the best Gorillaz albums.
That equalises it a little bit, yeah.
Go on. I'm listening.
No, I don't want to burn bridges by saying what I really think of The Clash. Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
So this is probably the Ramones' only sort of real cinematic legacy. I mean, they seemed uninterested in doing more, and it is just a weird fit for them all around. But in this case, the weirdness is part of the fun. There is a very good documentary called End of the Century, the story of the Ramones, which came out about 20 years ago. But other than that, I think the only thing that you can really talk about is, as you say, the Simpsons cameo and some of the films that have used their music to great effect. I always think of the Royal Tenenbaums, which has that amazing sequence set to Judy as a Punk. But there's a ton of them, really. There's a lot of great Ramones needle drops.
Yeah, it's best to think of the Ramones as this unimpeachable sort of punk rock icon, because if you think of their influence and the bands that came from their influence, I kind of hate them because of what they did. Because of the Ramones, we have bands like Blink-182, Graham. Because of we have those dipshits. Those corporate mall rock pricks. Not punk. It's basically a boy band by the corporate record labels of America. That's not punk. That's an insult. The Ramones deserve better than that. Pfft. Yeah. I'm not opening that can of worms because I really hate that sort of whole sort of early noughties sort of punk rock that you saw on MTV with unholy vengeance.
Yeah, I did not enjoy that either. My main memory of that time, like in musical terms, is just hearing that
Sum 41 song over and over again and thinking, at some point, someone's going to point out that the riff to this is a massive rip-off of Super Disco Breaking by the Beastie Boys, and no one did.
All the small things. Yeah.
Oh,
I heard that a lot.
Say it ain't so. Yep.
Yeah.
Even I can't stand that shit, to be honest.
NoFX, Sum 41, Blink-182, all of that. We're funny. Punk rock of the early noughties is just... Yeah, it's best to just... Like an isolated incident, the Ramones. Yeah. It's best to think of them like that.
You've made me realise that Blink-182 feel more like a punk rock band who would turn up in a wacky teen sex comedy than the Ramones, despite the fact that we've just watched the Ramones turning up in a wacky teenage sex comedy.
And the irony is, the Offspring, who are also of that era, they appeared in, what was it called? Idle Hands? Was it Idle Hands?
Yeah.
I think it's the band that the college sort of hire. Like, that's a college with a big budget to hire the Offspring for their sort of end-of-the-year dance. But,
That's... I always think of that as Twin Peaks: The Return syndrome, where the end of every episode of Twin Peaks: The Return just becomes later ... with David Lynch, as the Roadhouse like inexplicably just has the budget to hire 9 Inch Nails or someone like that, and this is a small town in the middle of nowhere. What's going on?
Really good pie, Graham. Really good pie.
This is the least logical thing about Twin Peaks to me.
Just to add on to this, there was a comic, I think '95, that was based on Rock and Roll High School, but I might as well. But unable to acquire the likeness and licenses for the Ramones, the comic instead featured the Melvins.
That's interesting.
The Melvins have like the famous one from the Melvins is King Buzzo, who's just like an American guy with all of the hair in the world.
Yeah.
And the rest are just people you wouldn't take a second glance at. I love the Melvins, but it's only King Buzzo that anybody knows from that one.
With his sideshow bob hair.
Yeah.
They could have just drawn Adam Driver over and over again.
Yeah. And that is the band who inspired, it was a big influence in Nirvana as well, Melvins.
That's true. Yes. Yeah. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah.
It's all very circular American rock of this era. Everybody inspired everybody.
I feel like Rob could do like the punk version of Hip Hop Family Trees if he wanted to. I think that would be good.
Want to. That's really boring. I probably know it sort of subconsciously, but yeah. Ramones are very, very important. It's just the legacy that they're left behind. That sort of era of punk rock really came out of aped their style, but with none of the sort of I wouldn't describe the Ramones as a graceful brand. I don't really know what you describe them as. They were just sort of...
They're cool, right? That's what the other guys lack. They're really cool.
The irony of you try hard to be cool, you're not cool, but the Ramones are the counter to that. They tried hard to be cool, and they were cool. They were really cool. So, whereas, them bands, man. Them bands. I'm sorry. I've got an argument about them before.
But before and currently, I feel
like really, really heated arguments, especially during the college years. And these were people who liked, just thrown out there, these people liked Lost Prophets, Graham. They liked Lost Prophets.
Well,
Lord,
history proved me right, I think. History proved me right.
Oh dear.
Don't Google them if you don't know about Lost Prophets, by the way. It is horrific.
It's
This sort of thing is why I've never gotten a tattoo. You know, I would hate to, because there was a time in my life where if I got a tattoo, it would have probably been about Morrissey, and I don't want the money for fucking laser removal.
Yeah, just turn it into a clump of ink. That's what a lot of people do now. Just fixing it in post. But, you know, Bowie would work. You can never go wrong with Bowie. All of his,
true. Yeah.
All of his stuff's out there.
Just go for someone really nice. Just have Adam Buxton's face on the arm.
Yeah.
Louis Theroux's face. That would
also
work.
Here's another, like, one of the things, the big sort of influences of the Ramones is a great Japanese band that we've covered on this show before, Guitar Wolf.
Guitar Wolf, yeah.
So close to the Ramones, it's uncanny. That has to be an influence. The leather, the look, they're all named after. It's like the band is named Guitar Wolf, Bass Wolf, Drum Wolf. So the influence is there, I think.
It's unquestionable. Yeah, I know in other Japanese bands news, Show and Knife have acknowledged that the Ramones were huge when they started out. So, yeah, I think there's something about the Ramones that travels well, isn't it? Like, you're introduced to them as this brand, and it doesn't matter whether you're on board with them or not at this point, because there's just something intriguing about having a band who are that fully formed, and you don't know, like,
are these guys legends in their home country, or are they nobodies in their home country?
Doesn't matter. They're a brand. You know everything you need to know about the Ramones just from seeing that first album cover.
Very, not as big as you'd think they'd be, but also much more influential.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there is a power to their image now, because you just have to hear like the start of any Ramones song and you know it's the Ramones. That's powerful.
Hey Ho, Let's Go has been taken by the electronics company in the UK, AO, and they've got it as their sort of their corporate sting, their corporate theme tune.
I guess it's a choice between either that or the Teletubbies for them.
Yes. But To have your music used in that sort of level means it's just cut through on pretty much every level you could cut through.
And, it always reminds me of something that Iggy Pop said, just to double back
one more time to the Stooges when he was asked why he did adverts and
things. He said, well, I make music that still sounds great today, but is too old for the pop stations and is too heavy for the oldies stations. So where else are you going to get it out? And yeah, I think he's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the good thing about you can still call the Ramones punk rock icons, not like another band which from around that era, like Black Flag. Yeah, Henry Rollins. Hate the fans, absolutely hate the fans. So you can still like the Ramones, and because you see a lot of their t-shirts around, not to the extent of Black Ramones, but you see a lot of Black Flag t-shirts around, and you can like the Ramones. No bones, really. No bones about it.
No bones for Ramones.
No guilt. Yeah.
Well, I think that's settled the first of our collaborations month, which I'm very excited about. We have got a plan for at least one more, which is producer Rob and Andrew reuniting to do Tank Girl, which is the sort of thing that maybe they are the only two people in the world where you could say, let's do an episode on Tank Girl, and they are both so enthusiastic. Unbelievably excited by
What's
the prospects.
band in that?
Ice-T is in Tank Girl.
Interesting.
Yes, he plays a sort of a kangaroo man.
It's getting a release through Eureka as well later this year.
No way! I didn't know
It is,
that.
yeah. Eureka Masters of Cinema presents. This is hilarious to me.
But we'll be back.
If this does go out first, as I'm planning, we'll be back tomorrow with a Patreon exclusive episode. And if you go to www.patreon.com/Geek Show, you'll find that along with last night, our exclusive podcast where we just talk about the shit we watched over the last month, written reviews on obscure micro genres, brilliant Asian genre cinema, by now slightly ropey episodes of the X-Files, maybe Red Dwarfs come back around to the point where it's good again by the time this goes out. I don't know, but yeah, what I'm saying is there's a load of content on our Patreon, and you can get it all for just £1, £2, or £3 a month, depending on your tier. But we'll be back on the free feed in 2 weeks' time. Until then, I've been Graham.
I've been Aidan.
And I've been Rob.
And we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.